So I'm going to do a couple of slides on the Wellcome Trust, one on my background so you've got a rough idea of where I've come from, where I'm going to. Actually, I have no idea where I'm going to. And then straight into the meat of it, which is that I was you a while back. It was at a place called Slough College, Technical College, and I did my CIPD and then I worked my way up through. Lots of speakers came. Some came and just spent the whole half hour talking about the organisation they worked for, and I fell asleep. Others talked about theory, which I never understood. I'm going to try and just link together some of those bits today and hopefully get you to see that there are some things which you're already doing and know that you can use in the workplace, so you can actually bring things to life in your workplace. Make a positive difference wherever it is that you're working. So, in terms of the Wellcome Trust itself, the Bill and Melinda Gates is the biggest charity in America, and the biggest charity in Europe is the Wellcome Trust. Something in the order of £750 million every year spent by the Trust on research projects, mostly into human health, but increasingly into planetary health as well. Been around since the early 30s. It was formally founded in the middle 30s. But the assets alone of 18 billion is just a number that I still struggle to understand. But what that means is that unlike other organisations that are charities, you will never see a tin being shaken. The Wellcome Trust never comes out and asks people for money. It basically reinvests 18 billion, and the interest that it makes on that, which is usually about 7 or 8% per annum, is spent on charitable work in research. So that's the bit. And the reason why I've put those 2 bullet points on the bottom is that we are just down the road. So when you see the Wellcome Trust as you walk along the Euston Road opposite Euston Station, that's the main building where all this activity is going on, where the investment people are working, etc. But also there's a thing called the Wellcome Collection there, and it really is just worth popping into. It's a free resource, you're allowed to walk in, there's nobody to stop you, your parents, family, etc. going in. There's some fantastic exhibitions that keep changing. They link human health with society, and they're informative, and there's a half-decent cafe there as well. So please do find an opportunity. You've heard a little bit about this already. This is just trying to help you understand the bits that I've done. Some of the things have been quite interesting. So in the very early years, it was Wickham Council, so part of the public sector, that actually helped cover the costs of going through college. Fantastic. And one of the reasons that I still keep going back and giving talks like this and going into councils, and why I went to work back for government at the Medical Research Council, is I want to try and give something back. I have I counted up 28 people I'm currently mentoring, mostly from the public sector, because I think that's where people need the biggest sort of confidence boost and help at a time when the public sector is largely, it seems, about how do you reduce costs at the moment. Luckily, where I am, it's not about how we reduce costs, it's how we use the money that we have most effectively. So that's the big difference there. As was mentioned, probably the biggest single experience that I had where I got lucky was in Glaxo, because I joined as an HR advisor and powered all the way through to some very big jobs, including an international role called a vice president, which meant that I ended up with about 3 million air miles in my back pocket. And it was at that point when they said, would you like to move to Philadelphia to take on this even bigger job, that I said nope, because I don't even know what my family looks like anymore. I need to do something different. And I left to work for a small biotech. So in a stroke, I went from earning a heck of a lot to a very small amount, but I got my life back. I started sleeping properly, and I spent time with my kids. And if ever you get yourself in that trap, do think, hopefully one or two of you will be lucky enough to get into that trap, do think it is worth really questioning whether or not it's really worth all of that. Because yeah, you can have a new car every year, but if you don't even know that your kid scored the winning goal in the final because you weren't there for 3 weeks, what is the point in life? So that was a huge rebalancing. And then I've been lucky in the sense that beyond that, the Medical Research Council gave me a job that was stationed in the UK, but had some fun attached to it, working in Africa, in 2 big countries there, the Gambia, looking at things like malaria, and in Uganda, the whole issue about AIDS, before finally ending up at the Wellcome Trust. So that's the background. And I am here over the lunch break. If you want to come and talk to me or ask me about the differences between working for a massive, great pharmaceutical company and a tiny little biotech, which was Venalis, do that. Also, I can talk to you over lunch about the difference between the public sector and the private sector. There are big differences. It's worth a conversation. There's an easy lead-in if you're not sure how to approach me and what to ask. Just ask one of those things. There's a simple way to get the conversation going. Okay? One of the things that I'd love to do is to point out to people when they're being cynical about we have to learn this just to pass the exam, that some of the stuff that you do at college actually does have an impact in the real place, in the workplace. First one is you get taught about the transition curve. Can you all put your hand up if you've ever seen something roughly like that? Cool, that does work. So that's a transition curve. It's always as simple as that, isn't it? Yeah? So there's a problem identified or an issue comes up, people go into denial, then there's a bit of anger, they get very depressed because they think they're out of control and they can't do anything. Then they come to accept because people are bribing them or talking them around it, and then they get integrated. And you'll notice that it's slightly higher at the end because, yes, you're going to be more productive if you have productivity on the left and time on the right. All I'd say is that's great in theory, but my real life of going through something like a change at Glaxo was this. So what happens in real life is you get hit with something, you start to get what you think is through, I don't know if there's a pointer thingy on here, I didn't check that earlier. No, so when you first go through that, you think you're starting to come back out, and then you get hit with another issue. When you're going through a merger of two organisations, the first thing is your boss comes and says, you're great, Ted, you're going to have a new job in the organisation, it's all going to be fine, so you start rising above it all and racing on forward. Then someone else comes along who's in the other organisation that you're merging with and says, no, it's not going to happen, I've got someone who's way better than you, and besides, we're interested in diversity here, and you're a white male, it won't happen for you. Then you get through that and you realise there's actually going to be 3 jobs instead, and so it moves on. All good fun. It's up and down all over the place, and if you're very lucky, you come out at the end with a higher level of productivity than you entered. But as an HR person, what you have to do is think, this is what it's like for people when they're going through a transition. It is never a smooth curve. It is always a higgledy-piggledy mix. You can never assume that everyone in the department that's been reorganised or restructured is down at the bottom. Some of them will have raced ahead and be out the top. Some of them will be going through their own mini-crises because they'll overlay that with the fact that they've just discovered that their partner's pregnant or that their mum's ill. So there's a whole series of things that impact. And what you have to learn from all of this is that when you're going through any kind of complex change or reorganisational structure, there's people taking it at different speeds, and sometimes you just have to keep re-saying the same things again and again and giving people the opportunity to check in with you as to where they are now, not where you assume they are because someone taught you about the theory of a smooth transition curve. Yeah? So even at the very, very end, it's worth picking up with people because it could be, like on this one, they're just going through a mini dip and they're not yet ready to go full out with the organisation. Maslow. Actually, that's the modern version of Maslow, which I love, isn't it? Which is, someone said, actually far more important now than making sure you're cold and warm is that you've got Wi-Fi, and then even more important, because I do a lot of my work in Africa, that you've got a decent battery life. So therefore, Apple phones are out the window in Africa because you can't quickly switch the battery. But Maslow plays a huge part. And I think, again, when you're thinking about those issues around change and how you manage change and how you're involved in it, and some of you will be sitting here as HR advisors or assistants or administrators thinking, Ted, you're talking about something that only managers do in HR. No, actually, if you're in an HR department or linked to an HR department, you as an administrator, you as the person who just runs payroll, you are a part of this organisation. And if you can understand those transition curves and you can understand this hierarchy of needs, which, put in another way, is all about, and here's a lovely slide on engagement with the acknowledgement at the bottom, it's all about a whole series of things which you need to build up to understand that when somebody is hit with change, the first thing they're trying to do is to make sure that they're secure around their own environment. So if they've got a heavy rent and you're threatening them with a restructuring that could lead to their redundancy, one of the first things they'll be thinking about is, how do I bring in enough money to keep covering the rent or the mortgage? Though, in other words, they might have been self-actualizing the week before, but now they're right back at the bottom. And one of your jobs when you're talking to someone and they're just asking you a couple of simple questions because they've popped into the HR office is to try and help them understand where they are, where they need to get to, and what it is that needs to be done. And sometimes it's going to be your job to say to the more senior person in the building, either the HR most senior person or one of the line managers, we've got an issue. You've made your presentation, you've told them about where we're going to and the great glorious ideas you've got, but these guys are still back concerned about how they deal with their rent, how they deal with the basics of whether they've got any kind of, in this case, job security. So Maslow does have a big part to play in our lives, is what I was trying to say there. In terms of some of the big roles for human resources, that one I've already mentioned at the top. Helping people cope with change is a job for all of you and can always be a part that you play and always an important part. And what you do with the information is always important as well, about sharing it with the senior people that you work with, either in the line management side or with HR. Sometimes simple stuff you can do really effectively and well is just to sit and listen, to know when it's appropriate to take somebody for a tea or coffee away from their current workplace, or sometimes just to walk around the block of the building or go down to the river and look at the birds and just chat to them about what it is that's causing them a difficulty and grief at the moment. The mere fact that you're listening can make a huge difference to them and give them a chance to have a night's sleep that they might otherwise have missed. So one of the things that I've always said to my teams is, if someone presents with a problem, don't go, it's absolutely fine, I've got a slot, let's say it's today, at 3 o'clock Friday. Say to them, yep, I can find you 5 minutes now, and get the message out that your next appointment is just going to be delayed shortly. Or, I can see you at 4:30 this afternoon. Or that you have someone else who picks that up immediately. If someone's presenting with an issue, the last thing that you need to do is to be putting them off and sending them away. It can lead to all sorts of difficulties and problems for them, for their families, for their productivity, for the whole work. Another role I've got for you there is this one called holding feet to the fire. This is about the fact that lots of line managers will stand up and give great presentations. They'll run through a whole series of things because those presentations have been sent down to them by somebody else in the organisation. But they'll then do something different in real life. They won't actually practice the thing that they're meant to be doing. So they'll say, it's really important that we all go second class from now on the train, and then they'll be the first ones to upgrade themselves to first class and claim it back. Those things that we set are really important. Those little small things like that can have a huge impact on the cost base of an organisation, on the way in which people operate and work. So, for example, our director, Jeremy, came in to the organisation and just simply said, we're a charity, it's not appropriate that people travel first class on the train or in aeroplanes. And within days, we'd changed to a values-based process. So instead of rules that said, if you're at this level, you do that, if you're at this level, you do that, it was instead, would you have a red face if the Daily Mail or the Mirror questioned you about whether or not you were travelling in an appropriate level of comfort when it comes to your charitable status? That made a huge difference. And what he did was to say, I'm off to York, I'm going there by train, second class, and there is a change to what might be like for real life for everybody else. We always make sure that we have a reserved table, even if that, or a seat for Jeremy, for me, whoever's travelling, so that you can do some work or have a tea and coffee and have some space. You're not going to end up standing for that journey. I've gone over the top on that, but these little things make a huge difference. And if you practice what you preach as well, that'll see you in good stead. Saying you're not wearing any clothes is probably one of the most important things that I've done, and I've risked several times, and I've even had the sort of semi-sleepless night the night before going in to say to a boss of mine, this isn't working, you think it's great, you think you've got your message, it's not working. But every time I've done that, I've always been given a lot of great feedback, not just from that particular boss, who is so pleased that somebody stood up and said, this doesn't work. But I've also had it from others. Because what happens is your boss, your chief executive, whoever it is, goes out and says, I think I might have made a mistake here. I need to reset this. I need to redo this. So it is that role that only you can sometimes have because you're not in a line function, you're in the human resources team, that gives you access to some of these senior people. That means you can just say to them, is that really what you meant? That's how it's landing. That's the impact. And of course, you need to give some evidence behind that. And another big learning for me, I think, is that when we talk about things like disability, people automatically seem to assume that we're talking about a wheelchair user. We're not. One of the biggest single things that we have as an issue in the world, not just this country, is people's mental health and mental disability. And a lot of people assume that because someone walks into a room and looks absolutely fine, that they are fine because they look physically fine. But I think as HR people, we have to understand that stuff that goes on in people's heads is ridiculously complex, way beyond any scientific paper, still hardly understood at all, and has a huge impact on the workplace. So sometimes that can just simply be about stopping for a moment and just saying, how are you? Checking in with somebody. And one of the things I keep saying to the people that I mentor and work with is, when you go in and you're the HR person and you're going in to talk about the pay review and what they're going to pay to each person, don't think because they're a senior business person that you have to go in and go, right, spreadsheet number 1, this is the first thing we need to talk about. Take out a few moments with that person just to check in with them. How are you doing? How's things? What are your big issues that you're facing? Start to learn a little bit about what's going on in the department or the division or the company that they're running, and also something about their own life. By playing that part, you can start to understand where they're at, and then you can later play that back in terms of where others in their department or their division are at. Hopefully some of these things make sense. Some of these you go, what's he going on about? Just come and ask me at lunchtime and we can go through it in a bit more detail. Okay? Managing your own luck. What depresses me most about working with now, because I'm in a relatively senior role, with less experienced members of the HR team, is those who don't think to do some of the things on this list. Guys, you've all got to be thinking about doing these things on a regular basis. When somebody asks someone to volunteer, you should have your hand up first. You should be looking at what the opportunities are for you, how you can develop and grow yourself. When it comes to projects being set up and run, even if you don't think that you have the skills to be able to directly impact on the project, you can be somebody that gets involved in that and literally does some of the running around. Some of the biggest learnings I had in my early days were working on IT project teams where I had not a clue what they were going on about in terms of the technical side, but I could spot and see the human resources issues and the fact they weren't thinking, for example, about cultural change. You can't just change an IT system overnight. You have to think about how you help people with that change and you make it stick and make it real. The simple act for all of you, when you see somebody struggling who's senior to you, and you just saying to them, is there anything I can do to take some of the workload off you to help? So all you have to do, it's a very powerful thing. Sometimes more senior people will assume that you're busy and don't have the time. If you just say, I can do this, or for example, even better, on certain occasions when you know there's a huge amount going on, I've got nothing this evening, I can stay and sort this for you if you want me to. That's a huge thing if you do that. Those are the people I always remember and think, wow, they get it, they can help out. I don't abuse that. I make sure that they have time off the following week, like the day off to go and do some extra shopping if it's around Christmas or whatever. It's little things like that make a huge difference. Even if an internal role is a bit of a stretch for you, think about the idea of applying for it. This is about you helping yourself, don't forget, but you can also apply this to others in the business who are there. Part of this is about saying, if you don't apply for an internal role that's coming up in your organisation, how do people know that you've got ambition and want to go further? Okay? So the only way they'll know is if you put yourself up and you make a reasonable case and you put your work into it. But that applies, as I say, to others. So when you're advising other people, it's always to do that. particularly, this is a sad thing, but there's lots of good evidence around it. It is the case, we now know, that many women will look at a job description and they'll go, there's 3 essentials, yeah, I've got them, 4 desirable things on there, I've only got 2 of them, I shouldn't apply. Whereas the male will look at it and go, I've got 2 of the essentials, not the 3rd, I haven't got any of the desirables, but I'll still give it a go. There is evidence now to show that women will hold off because they don't have the confidence to apply for something. So either because you're a woman in this room, you've got to challenge yourself on that, but also for everyone in this room, you've got to help make sure that when jobs come up internally, you are encouraging people to get over those hang-ups and give it a try. It could be that there's some training or mentoring that's available to help. The other thing is, someone's doing 4 days a week and they say, I can't do that because it looks like a full-time job. Who knows, you might be able to do it on a full-time basis. What if you'd taken that job on before, then you got pregnant and announced you needed to come back on 4 days? It would have been a reasonable adjustment. Why not make the reasonable adjustment up front? Argue for it straight off. Okay? I don't know whether it looks like I do or not. I hated doing my first presentations. I always needed to find where the toilet was, and I used it 3 or 4 times. The adrenaline built up. I would get into stuttering mode. I had a horrible time. But I went at it again and again and again. Because at the end of the day, standing up in front of people or sitting down in front of a table and being the one who volunteers to give the presentation gives you a sight that other people will otherwise miss. It gives you an opportunity to really learn your subject and to be noticed. So do think about doing that. Never ever shy off or back off. This bit about mentoring, I'm not a believer in big mentoring schemes where you sign up and you're assigned somebody after filling in what looks like a dating application sheet. I'm more into, you have respect for somebody, you used to work for them in the past, they were a teacher, they were a college lecturer, they were somebody that you worked at in your last job. Why not just say to them, can I buy you lunch or tea or coffee? I've got some things I'm just thinking through and I'd love your advice. You don't have to ask them formally to be a mentor. You can just set that off and get it going. When I said earlier, I've got lots of people that are mentors, that I mentor. Probably half of them wouldn't even think that I'm mentoring them. It's like that. The other bit is that by being a mentor as opposed to mentoring, you learn a hell of a lot. So nowadays, I am constantly learning from the people I mentor. And there's a couple of times recently when I've said, I'm going to pay for this meal that you promised me, because I've just learned about 20 things, and I don't think I've given you anything other than a few pointers as to how to rewrite your CV or whatever it is. So there's another thing. Think about each of you. There's somebody always that is less experienced and junior to you that you can mentor. In some of your cases, that might be somebody coming through sixth form at school or at college. In other cases, it'll be somebody far more senior. Abuse and use things like LinkedIn. Sadly, it's becoming a bit Facebook-like at the moment. I keep getting messages saying it's someone's birthday. I don't really want to know that on a business application, but that's life. But the simple thing is, people change their email addresses. LinkedIn means that those people that you used to know a long time ago, you still keep in touch with. It is working in that way. And this is something you can do if you have any kind of HR background now, which I assume most of you have because that's why you've shown up here. Otherwise, do sneak out now because you're in the wrong room. I think the simple thing is, offer your family, friends, anybody, just say to them, this is what I did years and years ago. If anyone's applying for a job and they want me to have a look at their CV, just ask. If anybody is going for an interview and they just want some practice at interview questions, I'll do that. So I have spent during my life lots of time helping people with those things. And it has repaid itself manyfold. The job I got at Vernalis came from a guy called Harry Finch, who called me up when he knew I was leaving Glaxo, and he said, do you remember when you helped Sarah with her CV and did some interview questions? Yeah. Well, we could do with someone coming and doing some of that at the moment here. Could you just come and give that a try? A little simple project that wasn't going to earn any money. The CEO liked me and offered me a job. I actually got a job out of having previously just helped somebody out who happened to be a chemist's daughter with her CV. There is always going to be a payback, but you're going to keep learning and developing and growing as a consequence. Keep looking at you in case we're at 10 minutes. We're getting close, are we? So there's an obvious one. And some last things I'm going to do. Whenever you're making a case, find some statistics, draw some up, base your case on evidence, and if you can find a cost benefit to what you're doing, always make sure that's in there. This is a simple thing. If ever you're asked to do a mini project and you've collected some data through a questionnaire, also find the most interested people, pull them into a meeting room and get some ideas out of them and write them down on a pad of paper. When you then go and present an idea to the board, to a divisional panel, to a boss, you've now got data that he or she hasn't got. You can say, when I talked to this group, they said, right? You've got referent power suddenly available to you that you didn't have before. It's not you having a hunch, trying to persuade your boss that this is a great idea. It's now you, armed with data because you've collected it, presenting an idea. Okay? I'm going to whiz through these because of time. Lots of times I've come up with an idea, I think it's great, I've tried to make a change, and this is in the early days, and it fell apart. It didn't work. What I learned was that any change leads to huge amounts of resistance. People are naturally conservative in nature. They like the status quo, they like things to stay as they are. All you have to do to get around that, and you can use this whenever you like, is you just simply say to people, it's okay, we're going to do this differently just for a trial period. And in 3 months, we'll have a look at it and review it and decide whether it's a good idea or not. And if it doesn't work, we'll go back to where we are. All the conservatives, and I mean small c, they'll go, okay, that's fine, we can allow that, it's not going to be a problem, let's just get on with it. Everybody else leaps at it because they love the idea of that change and they back you and support it. If you go back to Glaxo at Stevenage, 20 odd years ago, there are still 16 or 17 trial periods running after all those years, and people have forgotten that it's a trial. It never made it into a policy book. HR is not about policy books and statements. It's about getting stuff done, and that is the big one when it comes to getting stuff done. It's not threatening to people to just give something a try. Some of them, they love it because they think they're involved in an experiment, in a trial. It gives them access to come back to you and say, I didn't like that bit, but that was okay, or could we do this slightly differently? It works a treat. Just use it all the time. The other thing that's really powerful, there's the arrow. Normally, let's say you're on the right-hand side and you've got an issue, or this is going on within a department where there's some sort of conflict. What you do, it's a very simple technique. When the person, preferably when they're not there, they've gone away for the day, they're away on business, you go and sit in the boss's chair and you see the problem that's presented from this side at the moment, from this perspective. It sounds stupid, but simply by sitting in that other person's chair, pretending to a bit of email, making a phone call, you get a feeling for what the issues are as they see it, what the business case is from their perspective, and you start to understand why they're struggling. So I've often got people who are in a junior role to someone else to sit here, and I sit there, I play them, they play their boss. We just do a role play. And they come out of there and they go, wow, I've got it. I finally understand what it was that I was doing wrong and why I couldn't get my opinion across. Sandpitting is about, don't just play in your own place, go and play in other places. We've now introduced this at Wellcome Trust, I've introduced it at everywhere else I've been. This is the concept where you all take a holiday and you go a week if you're working in a business and you take a week out. Why not take a week out in another department? Go and learn about it. So for example, I've gone at the Wellcome Trust and just sat at reception for a day and learnt all about what it's like being in reception and how horrible some people can be to you when they come and they were expecting something else, etc. But I've also gone and sat and worked in the library. I've gone and sat and worked in the galleries. I've gone and sat and worked in the facilities team. By playing in another sandpit, you get to see a different way of operating and working. And the final one is offer people a magic wand. So, what this means is, sometimes you have to unlock people's brains by saying to them, remove all of the things which you think are restraints, all the things which mean you can't do something. If I gave you a magic wand, how would you fix this? Ding! I'd fix it by doing this. And then, because you're the HR person, you're talking to them, you start to talk about how you turn that into a reality. And there's only one book I've ever read all the way through. So I did work with Ulrich in the early days, and I'm sorry that you've had all that stuff about business partnering inflicted on you as a consequence. But this is the guy. If you don't know about this guy, yes, it's 20 years old. This guy took over his father's business and was amazing. He got to the point where he got his workforce selecting who their boss was going to be and putting up all their salaries on a wall. And agreeing that someone was paid more than they should be, but actually the cleaner needed to be paid more because they weren't just cleaning, they were going around giving good ideas and keeping people happy and mentally happy when they were going. At the moment, at the Wellcome Trust, we have Valentina who runs our coffee system. If ever you're feeling vaguely depressed, you go and get a coffee from Valentina and you come back refreshed. She is exactly that kind of person that should be earning twice as much as the London living wage because she is phenomenal. Okay? Thank you.